Welcome back to the Cloudcast. I'm your host, Brian Gracely. And again, time has gone past very, very quickly. We are at another Cloud News of the Month, this time for June of 2024. And as we were last month, and it feels like just a few minutes ago, we are joined by rock star, friend of the show, Brandon Whichard, co-host of Software Defined Talk. Brandon, how are you today, man?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm down here in Austin, Texas, where, I'm at the age where all I want to do is talk about the weather, and it is excruciating hot. It's just on fire, as it is maybe in all of North America. So I've not only is it hot here, but I'm bringing hot takes. So I feel like they should be extra hot for this episode.
Outstanding. Yeah, we have not had rain for probably at least a month, maybe a month and a half here in North Carolina. It's about 95 degrees. So yeah, we're probably just a tick below where you guys are in terms of every day. Every day is like walking out of a hairdryer, feels like.
Fantastic.
So I want to start this before we dump into the cloud stuff and the AI stuff and all the things we do on Cloud News of the Month. You're down in Texas. You are a sports fan. We're going to give people, every time you and I do a show, we give folks at least like 2 minutes of sports, whether they want it or not. Big story down your way, down in Texas. The college baseball sort of high end amateur baseball season just ended, and one of the coaches of one of the best teams in Texas literally overnight quit one of the jobs and took a job at the rival company. Literally overnight, flew home with his team after a loss. Next morning was signing the new check for the new job. Bitter rivals, the equivalent of, let's say England and France in soccer or something. Can you imagine this happening? Can you imagine, the CEO of AWS giving the keynote at reInvent and then like the next week signing to go to Microsoft? Like, why don't we ever see this sort of stuff in tech? Or is it just that they make too much money that throwing money at somebody isn't a way to get anybody new?
I think you bring up an excellent question there. I think maybe it's just sort of like in sports, we don't have to pretend that there isn't hatred between the two groups. So really between, in this case, Texas and Texas A&M, there's a special type of hate that exists between these two universities that are roughly maybe 100 miles apart. Right. And there's no pretense. It's not like, oh, we like them and, we want to see them succeed. There's absolutely no pretense. We're in tech. It's always like, oh, somebody leaves. They needed to spend some more time for their family. We wish them well. In fact, I think we talked about last time. In fact, we always knew they were going to leave to go off.
That's right. They were only going to stay for 3 years.
Yeah, to like a bigger thing. Like we talked about how ridiculous it was for someone to interview at Amazon and say like, I'm going to leave in 3 years to go get another job. Let me just tell you this. If you went to the Texas A&M or Texas, but in this case, Texas A&M, and told them you plan to be there for 3 years, get the team to the national championship only to lose, and then you're going to immediately leave and go to Texas, they would probably kill the person. There would probably be violence involved in that kind of interview. So I think it just comes down to there's a lot of hatred, but maybe within that hatred, there's more honesty, and there are no fake press releases. It's just like, I left, it's over. I know you're mad, and we'll see it on the field, right? Yeah, whereas in tech, we have a lot of like massaging. No one really leaves, especially at the executive level. They spend time with their family, and then they quietly reemerge. And occasionally, we get a tiny little bit of maybe a lawsuit here or there, an employment lawsuit, but it's usually settled quietly behind the scenes. There's no, if you will, press release where people are going at it.
Yeah, I think I would like to see more of that happen. I would like to see more. Executives getting courted at airports, where we'd be tracking like flight numbers and tail numbers on planes and stuff. I think that would make things a little more fun, especially imagine like right after reInvent, you've got the Thanksgiving holiday, you've got Christmas holiday. I think we should start making between the Thanksgiving holiday and Christmas holiday should be executive uneasiness time. Like we had it last year with Sam Altman. I think we should start to make that a regular period of time because nobody's really working. We've got nothing but time for tech drama. I think, I would love to see that start happening, even if it's at like the lower levels, right? Instead of just like the head coach level jobs, CEO level jobs, like assistant level jobs, right? Like the guy who does the day 2 keynote at AWS is getting poached. Or
I like it. I love it.
So I'm going to encourage
season.
Yeah, I'm going to encourage recruiters. I'm going to encourage executives. I'm going to encourage everybody between Thanksgiving and Christmas, make all your big moves, go poach people, And then, yeah, let's get a little bit salty when they go from one job to the other. Like, yeah, I didn't like those
I was
guys.
gonna
I
say,
never
I was
liked
gonna
the way we
ask
did
you.
billing.
I want to ask you, like, I think the closest I can think of in our world would maybe be Thomas Curion when he exited Oracle.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't. I don't think they did the press release like we wish him well. I think it was sort of because I think the speculation was there was kind of like a fight, right? There was some
Yeah.
kind of like boardroom drama where somebody said to somebody like, "I'm done" or "You're leaving," and he just left. And then,
Right.
but it wasn't
Right.
the next day. It was like 90 days later. He showed
Yeah.
up
I
and
mean,
was
we've,
the GCP CEO. So that was maybe,
yeah.
and I don't think there. And since then, I don't think there's been like a lot of like Oracle hasn't come out like, oh, he did a great job here, he was great, and then I don't think he said anything
Right.
super positive about his time. So I think that's maybe the closest we've seen so far.
Yeah, we've heard a few, right? Like you've heard, I don't know, there was I want to get the name wrong. I feel like at one point Steve Ballmer threw a chair because somebody said they were leaving Microsoft, and like we've heard a few of those. I know at one point there was a Cisco engineer who literally nailed his leaving letter with a 2x4 to his boss's door. This was back in the 90s. I mean, these things happen. They tend to leak out through like Kara Swisher or something like that. Like, folks,
Yeah, true.
let's get this more mainstream. Let's, we'd be
That's
more than
right.
happy. In fact, you know what? We'd be happy to, because most of our shows between November and December are kind of, year-end wrap-ups. Like, let's make that salty season. Let's get that out there. We're happy to do it. You guys on Software Defined Talk, I'm sure would be happy to do it. So we're going to throw that out there. Salty season, November, December. Let's get some executives moving around.
I love
All
it.
right.
I look forward to it. Send us all the leads. Love it.
Good, love it. All right, let's jump into this cloud news of the month. I feel like May and April were real hot. There was a lot going on, lots of announcements, lots of events. Feels like June had a few things, but we are starting to wind down. So why don't we jump into first, kind of what we call good old fashioned cloud news. What big things happened in cloud over this past month that we should care about or know about?
Well, I mean, I think, one of the things you put in here in the notes, I guess there's the big 10 years of Kubernetes, right? So that was the big anniversary. And I thought, there's some interesting stats that came out of it. I guess it's sort of like I guess things I looked here was there are now 88,000 contributors for
Wow.
8,000, I guess working in 8,000 companies over 44 countries. And I was thinking to myself, that is pretty impressive. Like sometimes I think we kind of look back on it and it's like, so it's kind of the good. It's like the good is like, wow, this is probably maybe one of the most successful open source projects of all time as far as actually getting people involved. Maybe Linux
Right.
would be like the number one, the Hall of Famer. So this would be number two. And, just tons, like over 4 million contributions, 300,000 pull requests. And part of me was like, that's pretty cool. Now, in that same note that they put out, though, they went out and said that there are now close to 200 projects in the CNCF, right? Which, again, like you're putting together a release like this, that is impressive. But then I was thinking to myself, like, no, I kind of think this is the problem, right? The fact that like there are now 200 projects on top of inside the CNCF, on top of, this, if you will, massively successful Kubernetes project. And I think, one of the other links in here was sort of like talking about the complexity, right? And I think there was a great quote about complexity causes pain. And they're just talking about like, this is really hindering adoption of a lot of this stuff. So I don't know. It is just an interesting milestone in the sense of like, I saw all the pictures and everyone that's worked on it. I can see why there's like a rally to be like, this is an incredible milestone. At the same time, I feel like maybe we've gone off track a little bit. Like if if 200 projects is success and it's like, if next year it's 300 or more, it's sort of, if you will, starts to become more and more difficult for the normal person to take advantage of all this stuff. So I thought that was
Right.
an interesting milestone. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that the data is interesting because on one hand, the data is a lot of big numbers, and so you do things in your mind where you go like, okay, 88,000 people, 44 countries, like if this was an individual company, it would be the size of, let's say, like all of Oracle or something like that, or all of Microsoft, or I don't know how big the actual team is that falls under AWS or something, but like it would be a gigantic thing coordinated across 44 countries. So like that in and of itself is really impressive. And then at the same time, if you were to say it took 88,000, or let's say like 80,000 people to create the thing that is Kubernetes, and how much revenue has Kubernetes generated, let's say over the last 10 years or whatever, and let's say it's 15 or 20 billion dollars, I don't know what it is, you would kind of go, okay, so it's it's fine, right? Like it's a nice tech company, it's done relatively well. It feels like it's a great case study in like the challenge of doing distributed development and distributed computing and all these sort of things. And at the same time, to a certain extent, it feels like the inefficiency of open source versus, everything being done under one roof with one set of product managers and so on and so forth. So it feels like sort of the best of all world, the best of all things, and sometimes the inefficiency of a lot of things as well. But I think, that would summarize open source as a whole as well. That might be like on its tombstone at some point.
Well, I do think it is. In some ways, it is sort of the success of a massive engineering project. And I think one of the things they talked about in the roadmap was sort of like, if you will, making it even more vendor neutral and kind of making it more pluggable. And, in some ways, it is sort of the software architect's dream. It's like, yeah, every layer, you can replace it with your own implementation. And, there's kind of, if you will, high cohesion, low coupling, and, you can kind of do what you want and, you're not locked in. And it's like, it's true. It's like, that's really a great thing. It's also probably the reason that I feel like adoption is just kind of slowed. Not so much in the world that we're kind of talking to, probably people in listening to the show all get it. But I always think of like the kind of the customers I talk to a lot that just running lots of virtual machines and trying to figure it out. I just feel like, it's still very difficult for them to kind of embrace all of this and figure out how to use it. And so that's going to be the challenge going forward, is like, does this ever get to the point that it gets simple enough that adoption starts to go way, way up, right? Where it's like, this is the only way to do it. And I think like, go back to like where this all started, like the simplicity of Docker, right? When you did it and you were like, oh, this is awesome. That is very different than Kubernetes, right? And so that'll be really interesting for, just the whole project in general, like what happens in the future.
Right. Well, and I think it's always going to be something that's going to get compared to virtualization or VMware in terms of being like, well, it was sort of the next computing paradigm, but at the same time, like it made you have to think about your application differently. It made your operations different. It made your troubleshooting different, all the things. Whereas if you looked at virtualization, it was sort of like, well, there's a computer and now there's still a computer. It just happens to be software. And so, the application can just drop in. Developers don't have to do anything different. Yes, operations had to learn some new stuff, but, it wasn't, radically, it's still compute, storage, and networking. Whereas, Kubernetes kind of still deals with, the applications that are new and modern. And for the most part, new and modern is always only going to be 15, 20% of any IT organization's, current kind of footprint, if you will. Right. So I think you're right. I don't know if it's slowing down or if it's sort of, expanded as far as it can expand. And it'll be interesting to see if, in the virtualization space, if any of the virtualization stuff starts to get adopted, KubeVirt and things like that are starting to see some traction, but obviously have a huge uphill to climb versus, what the footprint that VMware has and all the challenges going on in the VM world, or at least the changes going on in the VM world. So
I think it's fair to call them challenges. I like it.
There's an interesting article that you and I sort of discussed offline, or actually over in the Software Defined Talk Slack. A guy named Brian Grant, who was a sort of distinguished engineer, top of the top engineer, infrastructure engineer over at Google, was one of the kind of core people for Kubernetes forever, has been writing this series of blog posts about kind of infrastructure as code and all that sort of space. I think he did a really nice job. There's a link in the show notes where he talked about kind of the infrastructure as code landscape. You had a very interesting comment about, oh my God, it takes all those tools to do all that stuff. Like what's your take on infrastructure as code? Because it feels like it was a big thing for a while and then it sort of fell off because companies like Puppet and Chef and others got acquired by private equity or SaltStack. It feels like it's making a little bit of a comeback. There's some very smart people trying to make a comeback, but like what's your take on infrastructure as code, or do you think there's anything interesting there?
Well, credit to you. You've been following this even more closely than I have, but it is interesting. It does seem like Brian Grant, if you read his post, it feels like he's leading up to something, right? Because he sort of is presenting, if you will, the problem. And I think this last one is an excellent overview, but there's probably something like 50 tools listed in here. And I think his whole point is sort of like, hey, is this all working for you? Right. It's sort of, and what I think is interesting is like all of these do kind of follow the same path. It's like you're going to take something that's complicated and you want to, if you will, come up with some configuration files, normally how it starts. And it'd be like, okay, now we standardize it. We have a config file. And then the next thing is like, well, the config file is really confusing. And it turns out we want to do some other stuff in there. And then they create some type of language. Sometimes it's just adopting Python or, Ruby or something like that. Or they create some of their own language. And then you end up with like, okay, well, everyone has to code, but everyone has to learn one of these 50 tools. And now the complexity is overwhelming. And it kind of gets back to our conversation before. It's like, well, you wonder why people don't have CI/CD set up, or why it doesn't work well for everyone. Is like, look how many choices you have. So I definitely know, and I know we both had Adam Jacob on from System Initiative. His company's taking a run at that. I know you had the Dagger team on a little bit ago. They're taking a run at it. But it kind of, I don't know, it feels like they're following similar patterns. I don't know. Adam Jacob may disagree with that, kind of his System Initiative and the idea of modeling it. But for sure, like this to me is kind of the next thing. It's like, okay, we can, and we'll talk about AI in a minute. Like we can all write code a little bit faster, and we can maybe create application pretty fast these days. But like the struggle with CI/CD, is not going away, and it's only getting worse. So I don't know what the solution is going to be. Maybe he's figured it out. Or maybe, it's just sort of like AI needs to save us, right? Like we're always talking about all the things AI could do. And I think to myself, it's like, yeah, it'd be great for AI to just like figure out how to deploy this application or figure out how to test it, deploy it, and make it work. I want that to be true so much. I want that to be true, but I'm like so skeptical. But something's got to happen here. It's like we don't need another 50 tools and another like 30 different SDKs or programming languages for configuration. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like after watching this space for probably more than a decade now in various iterations and tools and so forth, that there's a whole category of stuff, and then there's a whole category of people who love this stuff that can be simply, kind of simply explained as, do you hate the current tools that you have? Cool. Here's a new tool that you don't hate yet. And I think it's going to be better. And I don't mean that jokingly. Like those people are super passionate about it. And, I assume that they've decided like, well, I might have tried to fix the old thing. Maybe I didn't like the language it was in, or I didn't like the framework it was in. And they, for all intents and purposes, actually think they can build a better mousetrap. But because we've now seen this so many times, I mean, if you really got into it and you said, hey, what's the difference between Ansible and Chef and Puppet and, whatever else kind of falls in that category, you'd sort of be like, well, they're all kind of the same, except a little bit different language and a little bit different agent or a little bit different. And you're like, okay, cool. Are any of them really, really different? And it's sort of like you just need someone to go, hey, tell me when you do the thing that's really different. Because again, you guys love this stuff, but the rest of us are just sort of, waiting for a Docker moment or an iPhone moment or whatever. Because it does feel like, somebody's going to try and do it again, but it doesn't really feel like it's, I've stopped making bad tools. It's, I've just made another one. And yes, I realize that once we, like you said, once we get past the basic stuff, we're going to get into the complexity stuff, and then it's going to fall into, well, maybe you'll love this, maybe you'll hate it, but that's, it's the next sort of thing. So I don't know. I think mentally in my mind, I'm like, I'm just going to kind of put this over in the closet, like in a box. I'm going to label it, tools that maybe will be good, but people hate them for now or whatever. And I'll come back to it if I move. If I decide to move somewhere, and I go in the attic and I find the box, maybe I'll look at it and see if I want it. But if not, like I'm treating all of infrastructure as code as a box that I put in my attic. And if I decide to come back around to it, maybe I will. But
and just try not to think about it. I like that. I like it.
It's sort of like the next person comes along and tells me they're going to do monitoring different, and they're going to, we're going to use less data and whatever. And then you're like, oh no, but you want all the data, and oh, okay, well that's going to cost more money, and we've got more graphs. And I'm like, okay, it's in the same category of like, people love that stuff, but I don't know the difference, and I can't for the life of me spend enough cycles to care what the difference is, because they all end up having, 12% market share, and then there's another one with 12% market share, and another one with 12%, and I don't know. I am the only part I am sort of interested in, because there's been a wrath of Google people that have been leaving lately for various reasons. And the same thing happened when, like when the first sort of cloud native trend started happening, right? Like people were leaving Twitter and they were leaving Google and they were leaving various places. Like I'm wondering if we're going to potentially see another boom of ex-Googlers who are like, we used to have this tool inside of Google, which was the coolest thing ever, and I'm going to make a version of it. Like that might be interesting. So if Brian Grant, who was an amazing engineer on Kubernetes, can give us a Google, the cool Google tool that everybody wishes they had, like that would be sort of interesting.
I look forward to it. I think he needs to come on, at least come on one of these shows on Cloudcast and explain it all when he's got it all figured out. He needs to tell us what it is and like what we should be doing.
Yeah. Another Texas article that I saw. Well, then we'll jump into the AI stuff. Texas article down your way. Dell tried to put their foot down and tell everybody, if you don't come back in the office, and I don't know if this was just in the Austin area or if this was everywhere, we're not going to fire you, but you're not going to get promoted. And apparently, like half of the people just said, "Fine, I'm not going back." Like they're like the threat was like, "Yeah, no, I'm not worried about it because probably you weren't going to promote me anywhere." Are you seeing any new interesting things around return to office? I know you've been interested in this space. Are you seeing anything interesting around return to office? Should any of us be looking at trends that we should, that other companies are going to try and adopt as well?
Well, I think, I don't know if we have any trends, but I do think this Dell situation, I'm calling this the most important employee satisfaction survey of our entire generation. Okay. That's what I'm going for, because everyone gets the employee survey, satisfaction survey, right? And it's like, whatever. And I think industry norms for responses to those are between 30 and 40%. But in this case, Dell did one where like 100%, basically you had to opt in. You had to say one or the other, or by not saying something, you did it. And I think the fact that because this is the ultimate question, right? It's like, it really is the ultimate question. It's like, listen, if I let you stay at home, it's two things. It's like, you will not be eligible for a promotion and you will not be eligible to switch jobs, right? So it's sort of like the ultimate question, right? It's two things. It's like, okay, what do you want, right? And for 50% of the company to say, I'm good, I'm going to take the work from home, right? That's the route I want. I mean, because I always think like surveys, the employee satisfaction survey, I understand why they exist. I'm sure they provide a good purpose, but this is the moment. Like the data is so often like shows up in these, like, if you will, kind of like adjacent surveys, right? You know what I'm saying? So this is the company. And I do think like we're picking on Dell a little bit because they sort of made this mandate. I don't know if anyone else has done it quite this way, but I think we can use them. I don't want to say I know anything about survey methodology, but we can just say this is probably a pretty good proxy, right? So when the company wants to know how engaged people are and how much they see their career growing, right? I mean, Dell, this is sort of like saying, well, 50% of people, were like, no, I'm fine where I'm at. I want to work from home and I'm fine never getting a raise. And I think if executives really want to know what's going on, and this is always the question I like to ask, I'm like, the data is out there, right? Yeah. Dell is a very strong data point. 50% of the people aren't. And I think we could say, and I know I live here in Austin, so I know some people that work there. You got to think it's even higher. Some people were just were afraid to say, maybe give the real answer, right? Maybe they're just like, I can't say this. I have to just say, even though I may feel this way, I don't really want to do it. In fact, I had a couple friends who were really, they clearly they wanted to just stay where they were, but they were just really concerned that, oh, what if I do this? Like, will there be further repercussions? And that's going to be interesting to watch. So for all the executives out there, it's like, here's the data. Here's what's going on. And I think two things, like across our entire career, I would almost say, we've been talking about for like 40 plus years. And I think, and it's still, the answers are well known, but I just don't know if executive teams can embrace them. It's like, one, if you go into the office, actually what you want is an office. You want four walls and a door, right? Like, in fact, early in my career, and it's just weird, like that was the norm. Most people got them. Even when I was a relatively low, co-op or like even like a entry-level person, but all of that went away in favor of open space. And since then, people have been telling us how great open space is, and nobody really wants it. Or people want to work from home. They want to work from home because what do you have at home? You have four walls, you have an area, and you have no commute. So that is what people want. Okay. Now, you can threaten people, their employment, and make people come into work, or you can pay them a lot of money. Just be like, this
Right.
money's just too good. I've got to be in there. And you can make them come in there. But like, those are just the facts. And it does feel like one of these things, like in 30 years, the same conversation will be going on. And it's like, no, we know the answers to these questions, right? So we can stop. I wish it would be great if we could stop asking the questions. But I'm sure later on this month or this week, we'll see something about how important it is to be back in the office and working in a cube. And it's like, that's not what people want.
Yeah, no, and you and I love a good tech documentary. I feel like there needs to be a documentary about this. And again, we're not picking on Dell, but Dell put this out there, or it's out there in the public. So, to a certain extent, like they want to be visible on this. I feel like there needs to be a documentary on two specific groups at Dell. One is the set of managers that all of their people, or the majority of their people, said, I'm not coming back to the office, right? Like, because that manager is now sitting there going, okay, cool. Like, on one hand, I have way less like quarterly employee things I have to write, because it's just basically like, well, you're in that job, you're never moving up. I don't have to worry about promotions. I don't have to worry about like, that's awesome. Like, less work for them. But at the same time, they're like, wait a second, my group has essentially said, we as a group will never be overachievers. We will never be high performers. We will never be on the right side of the bell curve. Therefore, I will never be on the right side of the bell curve. So do you see a whole bunch of those managers like, giving up their team, like going, I got to find a different team. I got to find something else. So that dynamic I'm really interested in. And then the second one is I want a documentary on the HR group, who now has to be like, wait a second. Yeah, all of our quarterly reviews, those don't matter anymore, because 2/3, 3/4 of the company aren't going to care. They're not going to do them. They don't want to do them. And then all of your stuff about like, hey, it's really important about culture and all these other like fluffy things that they talk about all the time that we all know is just sort of like, whatever, it's fluff. Like, what are they going to do with themselves? Because the company has essentially said like, yeah, I mean, essentially a majority of people, or at least 50% of the people, have said, I know the way the system works. I know that you only give raises and promotions to like less than 10% of the people. Maybe it's like 5% of the people in any given thing. I'm probably not going to be in that bucket, or at least, my cycle for coming up for it would be another 3 years, 5 years, whatever. I'm betting on myself, because the odds of me, getting in that were low. Essentially, all of the things that HR does to play games with companies and bell curves and bands of salary, like none of that matters anymore, right? Like they only now matter to like 5 or 10% of the company. And if that's the case, like, shouldn't Dell just outsource all of the HR stuff to some little company that a private equity company owns that's really efficient? Like, I want to sit in those meetings as well with a documentary. I think those would be the two most interesting areas.
You've hit on so much there. I mean, we could go 2 hours on everything you just said. And I just think
maybe we'll just do
the bottom line though is like, what you're getting at is like all the quiet parts you just said out loud, right? Yeah. It's just sort of like, hey, maybe the employment review cycle isn't that meaningful. Like, you're just like, it's sort of like, you kind of touched on it. It's like, it just calls into question, right? Maybe, and when you start to like unwind these things, right? It's like, maybe the culture and the thing that we think is so important, like maybe we've misread this, right? Maybe the annual reviews, maybe all the stuff that we think is important. Maybe it's just been quietly under the surface, where it's like, we kind of all know this stuff it's not that important. And to your point, like the thing that you said that is so good, it's like all of these employees, if we thought they were corporations, they are all acting in perfectly logical. Yep. I'm just going to repeat what you said. It's sort of like, the odds of me getting a significant promotion or raise are relatively low. I think 10%, maybe even, we'll use that as a number. Maybe that's generous. Maybe that's too high. Well, why not just take the known benefit? The known benefit is no commute to work, an ability to control my life a little bit better. If this were a business, if this was an AI agent, we'd be like, of course, this is the mathematically sound decision to make. And so again, all the executives are given all hands meetings, and they're talking about stuff, right? It's like, here's the information. You have the information in front of you. So when you go to all hands, you can just do the normal stuff, give the all hands meeting, or the VP of HR can send out the reminder notice about how important performance reviews are, and we can all just do our thing. Or you can start to look at this data and be like, we got to really rethink what we're doing here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think my last thought on it, and we'll get to the other stuff, is I think my guess is if you were to do a post-mortem on this thing, and this is the part that I'm sure like the executive staff there didn't necessarily think about because they're a little bit older, not ageism, but I mean, I'm guessing they're 40 and above. And there's folks who came up with the idea, who've kind of come up through their careers with the idea of like, I'm going to grow with this company. This company's going to lay out a career path for me. Like I'm going to progress through time. And I've seen my parents do that sort of thing. I think the new generation, like 35 and below, maybe even 40 below, are like, look, man, I've been burned by that before in believing that the company is going to set out a career path for me, that if I stay for a long time, like, and I'm super loyal, they're just going to keep promoting me because that's like, I don't think there's any of those expectations anymore. I think people go into jobs now, especially at a certain age, and they're like, this is my job. I'm going to try and be really good at this job. And, if they choose to promote me, like, cool, but I'm going to figure out what my next promotion is. And that might be at somewhere else, because I've also learned that if I go somewhere else, maybe I can get more money out of that, or I can get a better title. And if I want to come back to this company again, I could do that. But the hopping around sort of mentality that people were kind of down on for a while, I think is just the norm. I think that's just the way people expect of a certain age. And so I think the threat of being like, well, you can't get promoted, they're like, dude, that wasn't even on my consideration board. Like, that wasn't on my bingo board. So you're not threatening me with anything, man. I think that's part of it as well. I don't know what the age is or the distribution is at Dell.
No,
and,
listen, I don't even think it's an age thing. I think, again, you're just saying the quiet part out loud. Like, I think this has gone on probably since the times that like we've been employed. And it's just like everybody knows, and there's probably some survivor bias. Those at the top that are making some of these decisions that decide to send out the survey, they likely are the ones that got the promotions and, if you will, kind of made it all the way to the top. And I think their view of the world is probably somewhat skewed, right? They're like, well, of course, if we tell people they're not going to get promoted, everyone's going to come to the office. You can kind of see that like group thing happening what's our well, look around the room. Everybody here, it worked out for. Everybody that's not here, it probably didn't work out for them as much. They may have a different view. So again, quiet part out loud. All the data is there. I don't expect anything to change, but again, I think this will go down as the data point for a generation. It's like, no. Yeah. Look here. This was the employee satisfaction survey, and this is all the data we need to do. Now we can go back to like not talking about it, like you said, in the attic. Maybe in the attic next to CI/CD, we're gonna put the employee satisfaction Dell survey. We're gonna be like, we're not gonna open that box. There's some bad things in there. We're just gonna pretend that didn't happen. Let's all just get back to work, and we'll do the performance review cycle at the end of the year, just like normal. Pretend you didn't see anything. Yeah, this is. I'm gonna call an audible, sports term. We were going to cover some AI stuff. It's in the show notes. You can go read it. We did not expect to spend this much time on return to office, but I think it's been good. I think it's been a good conversation. I want to hit on these last three. I've got them as trends in the show notes. We'll handle them as speed round questions real quick, man. We'll wrap it up because we're gonna run a little bit long, and I know you've got some things to do. Do you feel like this AI boom, the talk that's going on around AI, is going to take the summer vacation off? I feel like we don't really have any big trade shows where any big new things are going to get announced for a few months. Do you feel like I feel like the summer is actually going to be kind of quiet for AI? Just because all the big models have been announced and all the big trade shows are being announced, and nothing really happens again until really October, November. So can folks relax a little bit from a summer vacation perspective for AI? Well, one, we always have open AI, and so we should never really relax, because at any moment, someone could resign from OpenAI and announce they're starting another AI company that's going to be safer. Take safety more seriously. But I really, one of the things, it's funny you're talking about summer vacation. I actually think for the people that are working at these companies, it's going to be a summer of coding, because they have universally all announced features. From what I can tell, no one has actually delivered on any of them yet. Right. Obviously, we just saw the Apple announcements, and to their credit, they said nothing would be ready until really October. But it seems like even by their standards, it's going to be a while till they get all their stuff out. The open AI stuff, I can't remember if we mentioned on the last show. I know last time I was like, oh man, the demo is really good. I certainly talked about it on Software Defined Talk. They had this voice thing, and they kind of said, well, it'd be available in the next few weeks. Well, no, that thing's not available at all. I think that was all fake. So that we know it hasn't true. Google, they were sort of lambasted because they said their kind of voice version wasn't going to be version until next year. So I feel like the announcements are set, and it's sort of like everyone has works to do. It's like, I guess the product management team has put out the roadmap, even the executives are behind it. But the question is like, can anyone actually deliver on these features at scale? So I think it will be a lot of heads down coding, who can figure it out, who can do it right. There's a whole Scarlett Johansson brouhaha, what mistakes are going to be made as companies rush to put this out. So I don't anticipate, more announcements. What I do anticipate is people rolling out things and weird stuff happening. Either it doesn't work and we're all going to complain about it, or it works super well and we'll talk about it, or more likely it's like there'll be these weird edge cases that kind of, if you will, the tech, and us included, we'll all talk about and be like, I don't know. I'm not sure we want this weird side effect that's going on. So it'll be real interesting to see what happens. But again, summer of coding for the AI teams. They all have work to do.
Yeah. So in summary, hot girl summer, they'll be at the pool. Nerds, stay in your basements, do some coding, get this AI stuff working. And
pretty much, I think.
Try not to do too many deep fakes try not to do too many deep fakes before the elections. There was an interesting article in which I guess a bunch of CIOs who have been, and I'm not gonna specifically, kind of bash on Office 365 or Copilot 365, but a bunch of enterprise CIOs, there's an article saying like, hey, it doesn't work to full performance because a lot of our data that it's used to train this thing is pretty old. So like, I feel like that's one of those things where you go, what did you expect this thing to do? Like, you have super old data. Did you just magically expect it was going to like get rid of your technical debt too? It's the point of the article is, CIOs are saying that AI doesn't live up to full expectations. Whose full expectations are we talking about here, right? Like, is this article basically saying a lot of us were hoping to get promoted or get big raises or get whatever because we were going to kick off AI programs, and now people are basically, like you said, they're asking for the beta features, and we're like, oh crap, we don't really have them. That feels a little bit like what this is.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I mean, it is kind of one of these things. It's like, hey, the promise of technology versus, the kind of delivery. We always go through this. And, this is the part, like, I have a hard time because it's almost like I don't want to have a strong take either way. Because I do occasionally hear on other podcast interviews where someone will come out and say they've done something internally that has greatly reduced. It's usually around customer support. That seems like a number one area. They'll be like, oh my gosh, we did this thing around customer support. And they'll talk about like how much efficiency they're getting out of it. And I think, kind of to speak broadly for all the CIOs, I think they all kind of are probably seeing the same things or hearing the same things. And they're sort of like, well, we should be doing that. But then I think when most of them try to do stuff, it's like, well, it's not working. It's taking a lot more time. We haven't figured it out, or, all the things, our data is wrong and stuff like that. So I don't know. Like, I mean, it's one of these things I don't even know sometimes when I'm hearing these stuff. I almost, it's not like I don't want to say anyone's lying, but I'm like, I want to see more of like the proof. Okay. I want to like use this thing you just told me about, like the fact that like you took all of your customer support problems down to like 10% of the people can handle like, 90% of the cases, and you got rid of 90% headcount. I'm like, I just want to go to the office and be like, I'm here to audit this. Is this actually true?
Yeah.
Because if it is, it's great. But if it isn't, it's like people are probably getting the wrong expectation.
Well, and so much of what we talk about is stuff that 99.9% of the people are never going to have any experience with it. We could do a whole show on service mesh, and 99.9% of the population, A, won't have any idea what it is, but B, they'll be like, I have no idea if we're using it or if it makes life better. But 100% of people are like, I want to play with the AI. I saw the thing. I want to ask it to do something for me. And so it's got the greatest sort of, if we were sponsored by DraftKings would be like, the odds of demo to actuality are, one of the greatest long shots of all time. Right. That's basically what it is they're taking bets on, what are the odds that the demo is going to turn into reality? I think I don't want to say we're in for, kind of a set of, failed expectations, but I think, the Jensen Huangs of the world with a $3 trillion valuation are setting expectations really, 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 really high. And I think we may see a second half of people being like, yeah, I'm going to chill out and go work on some other stuff now. I don't have time to wait for your thing. Although I will say this, and I'll put this in the show notes. We don't have to make a comment on it. But this is the stage we're at, right? So Jensen's out there telling everybody, look, if you're a month late, if you're 2 months late to the latest thing, like you're going to fall behind. But my favorite thing I saw this week, there's a podcast out there. It's a video. It's super highly well produced. So it's not like, you and I just kind of jumping on a call. And it's OpenAI is sending their salespeople onto podcasts to talk about how, wildly deployed this stuff is in the financial services sector. And I'm like, hold on a second. When you can't even spare an engineer to talk about this, but you're going to send a sales guy to talk about like what deal he closed. You are way, way, way over your skis in terms of expectations. So I'll put a link to the show notes in that one. I watched it for about 10 minutes.
I need to watch that.
I was like, oh, this is where we're at. Okay. I've seen this before.
All right, well, it'll be interesting.
I'll throw one last question out at you. I mentioned valuations. There are a lot of companies that are now in the 2T and 3T. We're now talking about the 4 comma club, not the 3 comma club like on Silicon Valley. We are in the 4 comma club for Google, Apple, Amazon, all these guys. Do you think we'll actually finally see a big acquisition spree, or do you think these guys are all kind of looking at their money, looking at their market cap, guarding it closely, looking at everybody else who's just as big as them, and they're like, I don't want to be the first to shoot. I don't want to be the first to put my foot out in the battlefield. How aggressive do you think you're going to see people now that they've got kind of essentially all this free money and this big run up?
Well, I think it's the case where they have plenty of money, but I think the regulatory environment has made it such that probably no big acquisition would likely be approved, at least under this administration. So I think they probably all have to kind of hold their fire. That's why we're seeing weird things. I think we saw at Microsoft, it was one of the heads of a startup, he just left. He was the CEO, just left the company. And then was if you were hired and the team was hired at Microsoft. So it was sort of an acquisition without doing an acquisition. So right. I think that's the thing. I do think they would like to do acquisitions. I think that's the key thing. I think, if Microsoft had its way, it's let's just buy OpenAI and be done. It's right. I need to put, I'm sure Satya Nadella's this team is just crazy and they're killing me. I'm going to put them all, and make them all work for me and kind of put some guardrails around them. So that would be one of the things. Now I know NVIDIA is the one I think, to me, if I would I know Jensen Huang, as you said, every day is pumping AI, but I would be most worried. I would go to bed if I was him. I guess I would go bed a billionaire on 10 times over, but I'd still be worried. I'd be we probably need more diversification. We need to do something. Just to hedge our bets that in case everyone doesn't need as many GPUs in the future as we thought. And I know they tried to buy ARM, which in retrospect was probably a pretty good decision, right? Because that's sort of taking over CPUs, but they got rejected because of, I think, regulatory issues. I think that was a European thing. So that's the one I just think I would, if I was them, I'd be we need to go buy adjacent businesses that, the one, we think can get approved, and two, because if this AI bubble, if even if there's a slight downturn, a downturn for them is they're down a little bit. They lost $500 billion in market cap in one day, right? And so I think that's the place. I don't know if it's networking. I don't know if it's, there's RISC-V, which is a new architecture and competitor to ARM. You got to take some of this money and do something with it to try to turn it into some other diversified revenue stream, just in case, right? And I think look no further than Zoom. The poor people at Zoom, they had that massive run up, and they were worth billions and billions of dollars. They weren't able to buy anything, didn't do anything with it. Now they're just a good, web conferencing company that doesn't have the market cap anymore. So for them, they need to do something. For the other ones, I think they're just sort of hey, we're huge. We're just going to keep chugging along. And we haven't mentioned AWS, but we need to talk about one thing. It's the people maybe working hardest this summer are the AWS engineers that are working on it. I think it's Project Metis. I don't know how to say it right, but that's their new AI chatbot.
Yeah.
And, I'm already pumped up for the keynote. That'll be November. So mark your calendars. But there's probably never been a more focused group of AWS. Well, I don't know. I guess it's Amazon, and they even said Jassy was personally involved. Have no trouble believing that. So maybe he'll make an announcement of that outside of AWS. But That's the area. That's the big one. I'm thinking, talk about move market caps, because I think Amazon is the least valuable of these companies. They're just over 2 trillion.
They're just a
And
2T.
You know, the meeting is we're getting this done and we're adding $1 trillion in market cap. You know, there's somewhere, maybe it's not written down like that. So that group is working really hard. And if there's any way they could buy something, maybe it's Anthropic to do that, they would do it. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. My long shot prediction that I'm starting to think maybe isn't a long shot. I think Andy Jassy's giving the keynote at reInvent again this year. I think he's coming back because I know you and I talked about, hey, they got the new guy in there. It's Matt Garman. He doesn't have a Twitter account. Like, I'm not sure. I think he might be. I think Andy is like, I got to be back visible on this thing because I think people want me to be visible. And the other guy can run operations and be the CEO and all this. I think he's coming back. I think he is itching to come back and be in charge of the technology stuff as well as running the rest of stuff. So
well, I think I
would not be surprised if he is very, very visible this year at reInvent.
Well, for sure, because I think at this point it's bigger than AWS. They're perceived as the laggard. They made the change at the leadership, and it wouldn't be surprising to me at all. It was like he's inserting like, you're going to go build this thing. I'm going to be on top of you. We're going to basically recreate an AWS, and then him descending from the rafters in Vegas to give the speech about how Amazon's launching Metis would absolutely make sense. Like, listen, we love football and stuff like that, but he's been out, doing Amazon network. And I see him at the NFL games all the time. He's been doing all the fun stuff, but like, Bezos from his boat was like, we got to get this $1 trillion in market cap. Get me an AI chat bot. So I'm sure they're working extremely hard this summer to get that done.
Yeah, exactly. No pool time for them. So, well, very cool. Brandon, as always, thank you so much for helping us recap the month. I know we covered less news, but I think we did cover the most important topic, which is, important to all of you. Do you go to work or not go to work? So with that, if folks is their first time listening, they don't know about Software Defined Talk, they don't know about the great Slack that you guys run and stuff, where can they find all these good things?
Yeah, well, go to softwaredefinedtalk.com or subscribe right now in the podcast player you're listening to. And I'll give you some specific homework. You should go listen to episode 473. We didn't talk about it on this show, but we did talk about the state of the cloud 2024 report that was done by Bessemer Venture Partners. So if you want to hear more about AI and stuff like that, it's an entire episode devoted to all of those trends. So go listen to that. It's available right now in your podcast player. And of course, you want to find myself or Brian, go to softwaredefinedtalk.com, click on the Slack button, join the Slack. We're all in there talking about what's going on in AI and talking about a bunch of nonsense as well. So check it out.
Lots of good stuff in there. Well, all right. Well, with that, folks, as always, thank you for listening to another Cloud News of the Month. I know we went a little bit long, but we always go a little bit long with these. So with that, I want to thank Brandon on behalf of Aaron and I. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the show. And with that, we'll wrap it up. We'll talk to you next week.